Welcome back to the Aussie Shed, ladies and gentlemen, for another episode of Project Fairlady. So recently I showed you guys a little bit of footage of a repair that I'm doing on the left-hand side of the vehicle. I'm replacing the outer sill. Due to when I was fitting up the Twin Z side skirts, I started drilling into the sill and found a bit of an issue and stripped it off, blah blah. Found a really dodgy repair from a minor accident that the vehicle's had at some point in its life, possibly in Japan, maybe in Australia, who knows. And the result of this was that the repair work had actually done more damage to the outer sill than the actual impact itself. They'd just done such a terrible job and then tried to rectify the shitty work that they'd done and actually kind of made it worse and then just bogged the whole thing up. So it was undetectable from the outside. You couldn't actually see it. They'd done a masterful job with the body filler of shaping and sculpting it to sort of, you know, to hide the fact that there was any damage there. But, of course, you know, when you find something like that, you just have to fix it. So the answer was to just get a whole new outer sill from Japan, which I explained is one of the reasons I haven't had a lot of videos out lately, because I have been waiting on parts for various things and whatnot. And I showed you guys where I was with it, but I really brushed over the top of it, and I thought, oh, that was probably a bit shit, Trevor. You should actually show a bit more detail of what's going on there and how to actually repair the sill, in case anyone comes across any kind of minor damage like this that they feel that they have the capacity to repair themselves. At least if I show you guys what I've done, you can, you know, find other references on how to do all this kind of stuff and give you a bit of an insight on how to do an outer sill on the Fairlady, you know, on the Z32. So we'll head back around the left-hand side and I'll have a little bit of more of an in-depth chat about what I'm doing over there. So as you can see here, guys, this is our new sill panel that's sitting on there. It's not welded on at all yet. I'll just take that off so you can have a bit of a look in behind there. So this is kind of your main sill impact panel that sits on the inside of here. Let's move this guy out of the way. So this is sort of a collapsible piece that's there to take impact if you get hit in the side, you know. And you can see it's not damaged at all, so whatever the impact was that happened on this side wasn't enough to push into this impact panel, and that's only just under the surface of the new outer sill that we're putting on. Your inner sill that sits in here and kind of steps out, and it's a big sort of a chunky member on this side. Again, it's perfectly straight. This hasn't actually even impacted against it or anything. So it's really just this outer sill. And so this is our replacement sill piece from Nissan Japan. As I mentioned, unfortunately, none in the country, so I had to wait on this. Fairly straightforward thing to do, but a lot of work, takes a lot of time. So you can see from all the holes in this, there's actually 160 spot welds that we have to do on this thing. So, and that typically means that there were about 160 spot welds to drill out to get the old damaged piece off, and then all of these new holes to drill, because I am going to be plug welding this back on with a TIG. So we're going to be making spot welds with a TIG welder, which is done as a plug weld, you know. And you can see the sort of goldy looking paint on there, on all this stuff. That's a weld through primer. Now, weld through is a little bit of a misnomer, really. It should be called weld around primer, because if you do try to weld through it, it will contaminate your welds and you'll have all sorts of porous welds and you'll have a terrible time trying to weld it. So generally the acceptable method to do this is you generally have to clean out inside your holes. So what a lot of people do, you spray all your surfaces, let it all go off, give it a couple of coats. You can either blast through the holes with a little sandblaster, or use a flat bottom drill just to run in there and just clean out all the weld through primer that's in there, so that it doesn't contaminate your welds when you start the welding process. I've done the same thing sort of on the back of here. I've used a slot drill and I've gone over the outside of these just to create a clean ring on the back side, so that as the TIG melts the edge of this, it doesn't put any of this paint into the weld pool, you know. And as I say, There are different methods that you can use to clean up where you're going to be spot welding through into this sill panel. But what I am going to do is I'm going to sit the sill where it needs to be. I'm going to mark in through all the holes with a Sharpie. I'm going to take it back off, and then I'm going to use a Dremel with a little sanding drum on there, and then I'm just going to touch every spot where I've got a Sharpie and just take the paint back off the bare metal. Have a bit of a look at it. After I put it back on, make sure there's no bits that I've missed or anything, and then it's pretty much ready for re-welding. When you unpick something like this, there is a little bit of repair work that you have to do, just because you make a bit of a mess when you're unpicking. When you use a spot weld drill, you get most of the spot weld out, but there usually are little bits hanging on here and there, and when you're kind of levering it off and tapping it around with cold chisels and things like that, you do tend to distort the areas a little bit, which you do have to clean up before you then go try to fit something new that's nice and straight and everything. So there has been a little bit of hammer and dolly work along this pinch weld and over these various pieces, just to get everything back into line from the removal process from the old sill piece. If you'd like to see what the old sill section looked like that I pulled out, I put a few still photos of it in the previous video where I mentioned this. I'll leave a link to that right there. And other than that, that's the point that I'm at with it, guys. Another thing I did when I took the old sill off, even though it's pretty obvious where the new sill is going to go, I did make a few little marks. I don't know if you can tell, but I made a few little tiny slits in various positions with the cutting blade on the Dremel, just to give me sort of a really fine detail mark to where to realign everything up to and everything. But as I say, once all this prep's done, before I start to weld it in, once it's all clean, I'll probably just put a few self-tappers in it, make sure that it's all in line, and then I'll refit the door, refit the front guard, make sure there's no issues. I'll probably even temporarily put back on the Twin Z side skirt just to make sure that that all kind of fits, because that was how I picked it up initially, due to the fact that there wasn't enough clearance between the bottom of the door here and the top of this sill, because it had been bogged up so much. They'd taken up a lot of the gap that's there. So, and your Twin Z sill, if you've seen them, you probably know they wrap around this bottom section. There is quite a big gap under the door of the Z32, which is perfect for doing this, which I assume is why the Twin Z guys have done it that way. But yeah, as soon as you start bogging up all of this and lose that gap, it makes it impossible to do. So I'm very happy with how it's going so far. It shouldn't be too much of an ordeal doing 160 plug welds. Obviously it's going to be very time consuming, but like everything, most of the work is in the prep. As long as all the prep's right, and I'm not doing anything that's going to cause me any more grief later on, it should go pretty well. Welding upside down under here and that's going to be a little bit of a trick, but it'll be alright. Ideally, it's a lot faster doing it with a MIG. Most guys tend to do this with a MIG. I don't have a MIG, I generally use a TIG for everything. The MIG seems to be a lot quicker and a lot easier to do it, but there seems to be a lot more clean-up work afterwards with the MIG. It tends to, I guess depending on the operator, but from what I've seen people do, the panel ends up with a lot more heat in it, and they tend to have a lot more clean-up over the weld. So I'm hoping using the TIG that I can do it fairly neat, so there's not a huge amount of clean-up afterwards. And then it'll just look normal, guys. Seam sealer goes back into all the original seams, and there will be no way to tell that this outer sill's ever been replaced. And of course, doing it properly like this, as I say, emulating the way the car was put together initially, which is the way things like this have to be done in smash repair. Not that I work in smash repair, but I have a good mate, Scotty, who works in smash repair, who's advised me on, how to do all of this. And this is the generally accepted method to replace something like this. You can't just kind of rip it out and just put a few tacks in here and make it look good. You actually have to follow the same layout and spacings of all the original spot welds, and same amount of them in the same places, blah blah blah, to do what's considered to be a proper job. So that's what we're doing. That's the way we approach things here in the Aussie shed. it's the right way or the highway. So, yes. So all the prep's almost done. You can see we've got all of our, everywhere where we've got a weld, we've got the weld through primer. Oh, all the e-coat, all this new black sort of e-coat stuff that comes on your new panels. You can still see it sort of in through there, but that's really the only place where it is. It's actually been ground off all the way across through here, wherever you're going to weld. The problem with the e-coat is it gives really good protection for the components, you know, while they're in storage and all that kind of stuff. But as far as if you're going to weld in an area where it is, it just burns up and it's friggin' gone. It makes quite a mess, really. It just turns to bloody powder, and it gives you really no protection at all if you're welding in that area. So the process is you've got to take it back to bare metal where all the welds are, and then hit it with some weld through primer, and then clean off the weld through primer around where you're going to weld, because it will contaminate the weld pool, guys. It will. I don't know why they call it weld through primer. Like I say, it should be called weld around primer. Plenty of videos on YouTube about using weld through primer and stuff. If you don't want to take my word for it, look it up. Everyone has the same consensus. There are a couple of different sorts. You've got zinc and you've got copper. This is one of the copper ones. The zinc one's a silver. I've used both of them. They just seem to be about the same. Everyone reckons that the copper one holds up better with the heat of the weld, but, you know, who knows. I have seen a few destructive tests with them, and they both seem to work pretty well. Way better than the e-coat, or even using a normal paint, like using a rust paint, or, you know, sort of an etch primer even, or a normal primer. The welding process just destroys all those paints, where the weld through primer just stays there, you know. It's definitely the best way to kind of do this sort of thing. So anyway, guys, I'll carry on with this. So what I'm about to do, I've got a few more of these here just to clean up. You can see the weld through primer is still there around some of these holes. Whereas these ones, it's all been sorted out, so I've got that to sort out. And I have to sort out the actual vehicle, the actual Sill panel, and reclamp this all back on, and then mark all the holes, and then just get in there with a Dremel and just clean them up. And, you know, possibly, as I say, I do have a flat bottom drill I can run into these as well, but it's probably easier if I just pull it back off and clean it up with a Dremel. All right. So at least that's a little bit more explanation of what I'm doing and the process involved in doing it. So I will carry on with this, and as soon as I get something worth filming, I'll show you guys. And that will probably be when I start welding it. Maybe. We'll see. Alright, I'll be back. So I've just done a quick fit up check there, guys. The door's on, the guard's on. Just making sure that the alignment's right before we do any welding. As I say, it isn't welded yet. It's just held on with a few self-tappers here and there. But the fit-up's perfect. And that's generally what you get when you're using factory parts instead of knockoff stuff, you know. All the gaps and everything are spot on. Way better than it was originally. And it just basically fell back into place. And I can even get my twin-Z side skirt on that easily without any frigging around. So obviously this is what started the whole process, not being able to get that on because this gap under the door was too much. It's actually sitting up on the heads of all the self-tappers that are along there now. But even with that, it actually still fits on reasonably well. So everything's going absolutely swimmingly. So I'll get all that stuff back off. And as long as I don't bugger up the welding, it should be perfect. All right. I'll be back again. So I nearly forgot about you guys. This is the last bit of the plug welding that I'm yet to kind of clean up. So you can kind of see how it was done. All through there. And, you know, it's all kind of looking pretty good. So next time you guys see it, it's probably going to be in primer. But, yes, very happy with how it's turned out. Okay, and that's the primer on. Alrighty, so we're now back in one piece. As you can see, the door's back on, front guard's back on. Door still needs a little bit of alignment, but basically it's all good. You can see that this all just like looks pretty fancy. In here, all looks, you know, very good. So I'm basically just back to where I was a couple of months ago with it. And even this, oh, what have I hit there? Should just go straight on, like that. Obviously there's a bit more to it than that. But yeah, as I mentioned before, there was no way you could even get that on before we did this, just because it was bogged up so much in between here, you know. There was just no room to sort of fit it all in. So, that's how you replace the sill on your Z32, guys, or that's how I replace the sill on the Z32. It is quite a lot of work, but it's not rocket science. It's something anyone could do if you've got access to a few tools and you've got a little bit of knowledge in this area, or if you're paying someone to do it, at least you can see what work they're actually doing. So anyway, guys, at some point I hope someone finds this video a little bit helpful if they're in a similar position like this. And I guess that's pretty much the end of this video. So as always, guys, thanks for stopping by the Aussie Shed. Always a bloody pleasure to have you here. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. And as always, I'll bloody well see you on the next one. Cheers.